Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Today, my dear friends, I'd like to talk about the assessment or the views of Iran war. And I would say the title of my presentation is Lies and Distortions, the US and the Russian view of the Iran war. What made me think of doing this video is that um, watching the coverage of the Iran war by various sources, and of course I do that regularly, including the Russian ones, what I found is quite extraordinary that the official coverage by the mainstream media in the United States and the official um, media in Russia is somewhat similar, to my great surprise. And of course, the unofficial or alternative media coverage in both Russian ones and the American ones is similar too. In that sense, there is a great divide both between the official and the alternative media in both countries. And the official one is similar in both countries as well. And I wondered why this is so and what conclusions one could make about the policy, the government policy that relies and promotes this kind of official coverage. So let me also say that it is extremely difficult to find out these days in our age of information what actually is going on. Because to any of you familiar with internet searches, there's so many fakes, there's so many artificial intelligence fake accounts that pretend to pose as someone else, someone even you're familiar with, and that give all kinds of nonsense, all kinds of non-events, trying to, I don't know, confuse people or make them click and subscribe or whatever. So it's extremely difficult to actually know the facts. But my task here is not so much to cover the facts, as they're quite well known from the official and alternative media, but to compare them and to see why the claims are made, the ones that are made, and what political significance this may have. And I start with the official American claims. And one of them is that the United States has established complete air dominance in the skies over Iran, that it had completely obliterated, as President Trump says, the airfields and the command and control structure, and it's called infrastructure degradation. That the Israeli Air Force destroyed most of the Iran's air defenses. I think Trump says 95% of air defenses were destroyed. On top of that, speaking of Iranian Navy, Trump has been boasting that the Iranian Navy has been sunk or inoffensive, that the drone stockpiles have been destroyed, that the launches have been heavily hit and don't exist anymore. So this is about the infrastructure. It also proudly claims that the Iranian leadership has been decapitated, that dozens of top officials have been killed. Israelis want to continue to destroy layer after layer of Iranian commanders, hoping against hope that that would bring Iran to its knees. And finally, the nuclear program, according to Trump, has been already destroyed several times and severely degraded, and the job is done. So the official United States Pentagon sources describe all this as winning decisively, achieving overwhelming conventional superiority in the air and on the water, and that was coming soon is the boots on the ground, and they're discussing various scenarios of landing on an island or several islands or even on the coast, and making this inoperable and that inoperable, and in that way to continue the war. Now, what I found extremely interesting and quite surprising is that when I listened to Solovyov's show, and I quoted to you many times, Mr. Solovyov is known in the West as the chief propagandist for the Russian side, or chief analyst, if you want, with very many experts that are talking in his show, various generals and experts and professors from various universities, etc. And what I found most amazing is that their coverage of the Iran war pretty much follows the American official media. That I found almost incredible. They repeat the official narrative that their experts say that Iran may hold out for a month, maybe for two. They'd be lucky to hold out for 2 months until the Congress has to authorize military action. Uh, they also say that, just like Americans, that the United States holds overwhelming superiority in the air. And they seriously discussed a couple of days ago uh, the landing operation, which they presented as the joint effort, possibly, of the United States, the Gulf states, Israel, possibly Kurds, and that they would and I quote, they would cut off slice by slice of Iranian territory, gaining control over the oil fields, which are in the west of the country, and advance eventually, relying on internal uprisings and helping those rebels, and gaining upper hand over the regime, and finally doing the regime change in Iran. That is what they were saying, to, as I said, my great surprise. Now, I am surprised though, because this is not the view of many critics, and among those critics is not only quite well known in the West, CIA former analyst Larry Johnson, and highly respected Colonel McGregor, and also an American officer who now lives in Russia, Mr. Krapivnik, and many, many others. And they provide very weighty arguments to the contrary, to the ones provided by the Pentagon spokespersons and President Trump, and also by the arguments provided by the speakers at Solovyov's show. So, speaking of air dominance, what they argue is that the air power is not measured by the number of airplanes sitting on an aircraft carrier that is 500 miles away. They point out that the range of the aircraft on the aircraft carrier is 600 miles. So they cannot go and back on a mission on one supply of fuel. They have to be refueled over the sea 200 or 300 miles from the Iranian coast, which is inherently dangerous. If they had air superiority, they would not have run away 500 miles into the ocean. American bases are destroyed. There's no aircraft that could be safely kept there. It is a target. Therefore, there's no way you could, in your right mind, speak about air superiority. On top of that, the Iranians have seems to be enormous supply of missiles and drones of all kinds, and they are doing the targeting and the hitting, and not the airplanes, as the United States. And speaking of the missiles, the Americans and the Israelis are close to exhausting their supply of missiles and Patriot missiles, including, and therefore, if anybody is in trouble on the air front, that is the Israelis and the Americans. No, possibly can one talk about air dominance. Now, speaking on the water, there's of course totally wrong to say that by sinking Iranian fleet and vessels, Americans had established control over the waterways. No, they haven't, and the best proof of that is that the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and there is so far no way to open it, and that Iranians do not rely on all kinds of expensive big vessels, uh, but on small boats that are hiding in various caves along the coast and are extremely effective in keeping the Strait of Hormuz closed. That is their way of controlling the waterways, not the American way. So, um, speaking about the coastline and the invasion possibilities that the Russians have amazingly so much thought it's possible and likely, the opponents, both Russian and American, of this view argue that the coastline is huge. It's about 1,000 miles. It's a rugged coastline, and it is very hard to storm and to establish a bridge, landing bridge. And the Iranians have 1 million strong army, and that judging by the time it took the Allies to prepare the Normandy landing on the beaches, it took them 2 years, and there are no beaches on that coast. It's a rugged terrain without any beaches. One would have to have a huge army, at least 500,000, maybe more like 1 million, in order to have any chance of success at landing, and that is not possible, not even planned, and 5,000, 2,000 Marines would not be able to do much harm at all. So any talk of landing is just empty talk. Moreover, they point out, and that's the Russian critics point out, that there's no way the Gulf states would work together with Israel. They would lose any credibility in their own countries if they do. And the Kurds have already refused any participation. So the chances for a land operation and boots on the ground seems to be non-existent at this point, according to this view. Now, I could only add that the more Trump insults and threatens Iran, unless you do this and that, we will decimate you, and here on it goes again and again, the less chance there is that they would concede anything. They would be stubbornly resisting no matter what it takes and what toll of casualties it would require. This is not, this famous negotiator, supposedly he knows the skill of negotiating. When you negotiate, the last thing you do is threaten with extinction a person you negotiate with. What if it doesn't work? What if they're not scared? Then you're stuck. And that, it seems to me, where President Trump is. So it seems to me that the critics of American critics of Trump and the Pentagon say that Trump is trapped. He got himself into a trap. He's stuck. He doesn't know how to get out of the war, and he goes from threats to saying it's nothing, like an excursion, and then he just keeps saying different things every day. Excursion turns into a military operation, and then boots on the ground, and then off ramp, we have already finished everything. All of that is correctly interpreted, in my view, by the critics as saying that he doesn't know what he wants to do. But my most important point in this presentation is to interpret why the Russian official media, that is obviously doing what the government approves of, why are they so much pushing for the narrative of Trumpist, Pentagon version of events. And it seems to me that there is a kind of a consensus in Russia, maybe voluntary, maybe the one advised from above, is that Russia should avoid uh, cheering against Trump, should avoid creating the impression that the Russians are happy or glad that Trump got stuck in an inescapable trap in this war. Uh, they want to continue to act as if something that they call the spirit of anchorage exists. And I think it exists only in Putin's imagination. It seems to me that the public opinion in Russia right now is turning very, very critical to Trump because of his actions against Venezuela, against Cuba, against Iran. And it seems to me that this endless talk about improving Russian-American relations is simply blah, blah, blah in order not to rock the boat and to preserve the illusion of some kind of negotiations and some kind of a nebulous deal that may or may not come. What you could also see in the Russian coverage, aside from specifically military operations in the Gulf, is that the Russians are quite happy that the Strait of Hormuz is closed, which gives them enormous extra earnings, which they need because they're subject to enormous pressure and sanctions um, by the Europeans and by the Americans. It gives more money to Russia. It gives less money to European Union. It gives less weapons to Ukraine. And it means that EU has to pay more for oil and gas, some of it Russian through India. In fact, on that note, Putin has recently said that Europeans want to pass sanctions package number 20 in April. And they don't want to buy Russian oil and gas. Well, we can stop it right now, he said, because Russia, he said, has more reliable partners in Asia, such as Indonesia and Bangladesh and India and China, who are willing to buy Russian oil and gas on a long-term basis. And what Putin suggested to do is just reorient the flow to more reliable partners. So let me then conclude now that it seems to me that the coverage of the war in Iran is not in any way, shape or form objective or telling the truth. Every side is pushing their own narrative in order to promote their political agendas. So do the Americans, so do the Russians, and so do, of course, the critics, both Russian and American. So, on that note, I want to finish today, and I, as usual, invite you to continue with your comments, which I always try to answer. I invite you to listen to my other uh, playlists on Ukraine war, Soviet history, Russian history, and of course, I invite you to read my book, From Vladimir Lenin to Vladimir Putin, my latest one, which will be soon published this year in Portuguese. Until next time, goodbye.